As I pushed through the front door, weariness from the work trip clung to me like an unwelcome jacket. The house felt off, too quiet and eerie, like it held its breath in anticipation. Dreaming of a hot shower and sweet solitude, I was interrupted by laughter filtering down the hallway. It was soft and all too intimate. My heart sank as I made my way toward the bedroom, each footstep heavy with dread. The door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the otherwise dim hallway. I peeked inside, and my vision blurred in shock as I took in the scene that unraveled before me. John lounged in our bed, entangled in sheets with Katie, my own cousin. I stood frozen for a moment, the air knocked from my lungs. John, wearing a look that was too smug for comfort, met my gaze like a cat that had just swallowed the canary, while Katie snuggled deeper into the cotton cocoon, a glint of triumph dancing in her eyes. The betrayal was a sharp stab, icy and jarring. I didn't erupt in a fit of fury or demand an explanation. Instead, a practiced calm washed over me, born from years spent navigating nerve-wracking board meetings. I took one last look and turned away, letting the silence echo louder than any scream. The kitchen felt like solid ground as I set my bag down, my hands almost eerily steady as I reached for my phone. I needed David, my rock, my strategist. "It's time," I whispered into the phone, those two words weighing heavily, like a lead balloon dropping into the silence. Hanging up, a wave of clarity rushed in. I wasn't breaking, I was gearing up for a battle that was much bigger than heartbreak. It was game on, and I had no intention of losing. I could sense it deep inside me, strength was brewing, ready to be unleashed. The next morning, armed with a steaming cup of coffee that had long turned cold, I sat at the kitchen table with purpose. I had no time to mourn what was lost, instead, I was focused on what had been taken from me. With a legal pad in hand, I logged into our shared accounts, ready to dive deep. Scanning through the months of bank statements, I felt as if I was peeling back layers of deceit, my fingers dancing over the screen. At first, the numbers blurred together, droning on like elevator music. But then, an odd pattern emerged, small charges, all under $100, directed to names I didn't recognize. They seemed innocuous at first, gas stations and consulting fees, but there was an undercurrent of something slickly methodical. This wasn't merely careless spending, it felt like laundering an elaborate scheme designed for cover. I sent screenshots to David, marking everything that felt off, my heart racing with newfound purpose. Before long, David was back in touch, urging me to dig deeper, and with each moment of focus, the tension in me solidified. I could feel my own determination brewing, transforming the chaos into clarity. This was about more than just betrayal, it was about accountability, justice, and reclaiming what was mine. Whatever tangled mess I was facing, I was no longer a passive bystander, I was the architect of my own comeback. Every turn I took in my investigation into John and Katie felt like shedding layers in an onion made of deceit. John had always taken charge of our finances, insisting I had a full plate with work. Initially, I thought it was sweet protection, maybe. But it turned out to be more like a control freak's toolkit. I had blindly signed whatever he presented, thinking I was being taken care of, but now I saw it for what it truly was, a web of trickery. As soon as James, the diligent investigator David had recommended, delivered his first findings, I could feel my heart racing. John and Katie weren't just having a little fling, they were running a business together. A business that, shockingly, was funded by dipping into our shared assets. It was like discovering a hidden chapter in a mystery novel where all the villains came out to play. And the cherry on top. The whole thing was tucked under a Delaware shell corporation, designed to confuse anyone trying to see through the ruse. Katie's name was prominently displayed as the managing partner, cozy, right? The plot thickened when Sandra, an accountant at John's startup, reached out to me through an anonymous email. She noted inconsistencies in the financial filings. Just as I was beginning to suspect things had spiraled into darkness, her email confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just a simple case of infidelity, it was a well-coordinated heist. I rifled through my old messages, unearthing one from Katie that once felt like a warm hug but now was a dagger. She had nudged me to approve a liquidity transfer to ease business pressure. Oh, how naive I had been. As I sank deeper into this rabbit hole, the inner workings of their deception became stark. They'd built their entire enterprise by exploiting me. Hidden charges hidden in plain sight, stacks of falsified expense reports, and loans I hadn't even signed. My signature. Forged. I stared at the documents when James sent them, not bursting into tears or throwing a fit but sitting in the stillness of despair, allowing the crushing truth to envelop me like a dark cloud. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a full-blown strategic assault on my life. Katie, my once beloved cousin who I'd trusted like a sister, had orchestrated this sordid affair. She had played the part of a supportive confidant, all while building a facade. The notion that these two people I once cherished had spent years plotting against me was downright surreal. But, rather than drowning in emotions, I began to meticulously document every piece of the puzzle. I was far from done. I was preparing for the sure-to-come reckoning. By my next call with David, I had transitioned from a naive victim to a woman on a mission. I had a folder packed with forensic treasures, forged documents and hard evidence that could shake any judge to the core. David's sober tone informed me that we weren't simply navigating a marital crisis, we were diving headfirst into murky waters teeming with financial fraud and identity theft. The gravity of our situation hit me, but a flame of resolve flickered within. In a turn that might surprise even tea-spilling gossipers, I took direct action. Instead of storming into John and Katie like a drama queen, I decided to play the part they had scripted for me, the naive wife and the forgiving cousin. I adorned my finest mask of innocence while plotting my next move. They were in for quite the wake-up call. The game was on, and my silence was merely the calm before the storm. At family gatherings, I wore my best smile, while John cracked his usual jokes and everyone else erupted in laughter. It was all a performance, especially when Katie draped her hand on John's arm a moment too long. Oh, they presumed I was oblivious to their little dance, but I was the vigilant observer. Lena, my no-nonsense friend, called me out on my charade. Why the silent act? Just blow it all up. I explained my angle. The show must go on a little longer. I wasn't putting on a facade for them. It was all about timing. Confronting people up front often hands them an advantage, and the last thing I wanted was an emotional circus. I needed to let John and Katie feel secure, believing they could flit about without a care in the world. Their complacency would be their undoing, and slowly, I could see signs of it. Katie casually reached out, inviting me to brunch and seeking my opinions on gifts for John, while I responded with syrupy sweetness. Meanwhile, John got cocky. He roped me into discussions about upping my investment in his business, painting it as a stress-driven plea in a tough market. Oh, I smiled and bought it hook, line, and sinker, while in reality, I was scheming with my accomplices. David and I were setting the groundwork for a financial freeze, sifting through the mazes of their shady operations connected to John and Katie's shell corporation. We were on the trail of their offshore account, a treasure trove of information. While they thought I was blissfully ignorant, I was the puppet master pulling the strings. James, our tech-savvy ally, tracked their money like a hawk, uncovering nearly $80,000 moved to Panama without a trace. In their minds, life was bliss. Little did they know I had stripped myself of all legal ties to John's venture and transferred my assets into a protective sanctuary. They believed they were on solid ground while I was laying down the pathways for their inevitable downfall. Katie's emotional pleas about John being honored at a tech conference were met with my exuberant cheer. Of course, I'll come to support him, I declared. Seeing the tears well up in her eyes gave me no pity, it simply fueled my cunning. I had a precise plan for when to strike, aiming for the moment John basked in his misguided glory. This wasn't a mere quest for justice, it was exposure, a theatrical reveal of their deceitful charade at its pinnacle. The night of the event was nothing short of a well-orchestrated symphony. The rooftop penthouse glittered, filled with guests carefully curated by John and Katie, investors, advisors, and a few press contacts who had been skillfully slipped in. They were all there, festooning the night as a mere celebration for John's recent accolade. But unbeknownst to them, this was not just a common gathering, it was the calm before the storm I had concocted for so long. As everyone clinked glasses and indulged in the festivities, I felt the tightness in my gut turn into a bubbling excitement. I waited patiently in the shadows, observing Katie Prue. In the midst of their well-deserved victory, I plotted my masterful sneak attack. While everyone else was basking in the glow of their triumph, I was there with a single goal: to cut the power supply of their carefully constructed empire. Each night was a strategy session with David, reworking the plan while meticulously checking the paperwork James provided. Slow and steady was the name of the game. I needed them lulled into a false sense of security. John made his entrance like a star at the Oscars, raising a glass towards me as if we were united in celebration. The man looked absolutely serene, beaming with pride, completely oblivious to the swirling storm of deceit around him. But I stood there, a picture of elegance, thinly veiling my intentions with a calm demeanor, while the room buzzed with anticipation, completely unaware of the impending chaos. When I finally took the microphone, I savored the moment, letting silence hang in the air like an awkward pause at a first date. It felt deliciously tense as every eye fixed on me. I started with thanks, looping in the narrative of trust and ambition, which was quite the joke considering what I had up my sleeve. People chuckled, blissfully unaware of the bomb I was about to drop. As I produced a plain white envelope from my clutch, John's eyes twinkled with foolish optimism. Inside was the sweetest betrayal: divorce papers, financial disclosures, forensic findings, and a court injunction freezing all his assets. It was like watching a balloon pop. His smile vanished as he absorbed the reality. Katie leaned in, and the sheer dread on her face was priceless. Before she could utter a word, I launched into the cold, hard truth about their startup shrouded in lies. Gasps erupted like confetti in the crowd that had once celebrated them. Richard Carr, Katie's father, pushed through the throng, his confusion morphing into disbelief as he asked if his daughter had indeed sullied their family name. I handed him the forged bank application, the perfect punchline to his earlier questions. Without uttering a peep, he retreated like a defeated magician. Meanwhile, I noticed Sandra in the corner, a quiet observer savoring the fallout. Her tip-off had set this all in motion, and all I gave her was a knowing nod. Before long, the legal implications sank into the crowd like lead weights. John's accounts. Frozen. Their assets. Labeled suspicious. Katie's reputation. Hanging by a thread due to ties to shady shell companies. Just then, David strode in, unannounced, delivering the final nail in their coffin: court filings officially accepted. The crowd recognized him instantly, his presence solidified my revelations. And there stood Lena at the back, capturing every drop of drama with her camera, plotting to unveil a juicy exposé that night without even mentioning my name. A web of deceit unveiled, betrayal among family. This story was gold. Walking out, I glanced back to see John slumped in defeat while Katie paced, her confidence in shambles. They were no longer the power couple, they were unraveling, and I couldn't help but smile at the delicious irony. In less than 10 minutes, their carefully constructed empire crumbled, revealing that it was never really theirs to begin with. Revenge? No way. I had effortlessly returned the truth to the very place that had been devoid of it. This revelation alone was enough to set fire to their house of cards. In a whirlwind of chaos, consequences took form like startled rabbits, popping up everywhere. Suddenly, Jay's accounts were locked, caught up in a web of federal review, and he found his name slipping from company records faster than a magician's disappearing act. Katie wasn't spared either, getting a pink slip from the legal firm that once sang her praises. With shame thick enough to cut, their world collapsed under legal scrutiny, pain, and a deafening silence that spoke volumes. Meanwhile, I made my escape, moving into a quiet top-floor apartment stripped of all shared history. It wasn't about flaunting my new beginnings but finding a serene space for reflection and planning. The first few nights were heavy yet not overwhelmingly painful. The air held no celebratory vibe, just a stillness that blanketed everything. For the first time in ages, anger had done its job, stepping back to let peace take its place. Expecting turmoil, I unexpectedly found calm. I embraced the freedom to exist outside the debris of their betrayal. With newfound courage, I enrolled in a cooking class, something I always thought was too extravagant for my busy life. Mornings filled with spontaneous sketching reignited a blissful feeling of freedom, allowing me to slowly reclaim my days. Each day was quiet but refreshingly mine. As I began to rebuild my professional life, it was clear that I was wiser than ever. I launched a consulting firm, helping clients navigate internal controls and fraud prevention, drawing strength from the very process that nearly broke me. The women who sought my services understood the sting of being overlooked until disaster struck. I never had to market myself as a survivor. My newfound clarity was my best advertisement. John made a desperate attempt to reach out through a letter shared by his lawyer. I didn't even crack it open, his words no longer held sway in my world. Meanwhile, Katie faced familial repercussions. Some disowned her while others carried on as if nothing had happened. I didn't fight that battle, I simply withdrew, one boundary at a time, realizing that letting go was no longer an act of mercy, it was empowering. Weeks later, I strolled confidently into a penthouse event, fully aware I had severed my ties to the past. In my tranquil home, I felt liberated, ready to embrace a life unshackled from their shadow. Healing wasn't a grand spectacle, it arrived gently, waves of peace, restful nights, and genuine laughter. I could finally look in the mirror and see me, not just the betrayed woman. Then, one afternoon, I met someone new. It wasn't a dramatic encounter but a simple, human moment shared in comfortable silence. He had no idea about my past, and I had no intention of divulging it. We were two souls appreciating the present, with no urgency to forge something based on rescue fantasies. I was no longer defined by John and Katie, they were just a fading chapter in my story, and now I was propelling